Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion today with regards to how to ace your Zoom interview, brought to you by the College of Business here at UMSL. So we're excited to be here with you today to kind of go through and share some of the tips and the tricks as we go through and kind of move more towards the in-person interviewing versus going through and doing virtual interviews. So we'll kind of share with you a little bit about how to best prep for your virtual interview, as well then as to kind of give you tips for the day of for those virtual interviews as well then too. So know also that, if you guys have any questions that come up during the panel discussion today, feel free to go through and add those questions into the chat. And so time permitting at the end, we'll go through and then also be able to, review some of the questions and hopefully be able to answer some of your questions for you as well. And this is also being recorded. So Caitlin will walk us through at the end to go through and let us know exactly how to go through and get a copy of the recording should you guys be interested in being able to go through and review this information then at a later date. So thank you so much for your time. We're very excited to be here. So wanted to go through and introduce our panel today. So we have Avery, who is part of the talent development department over at Fleishmanhillard, which is a global communications agency. So Avery has been with Fleishman for the last 5 years, so has expertise in recruiting, interview training, performance management, as well as career mapping. So welcome, Avery. And then we also have Elizabeth with us today, and Elizabeth is the St. Louis Metro Market Manager for Robert Half and the Creative Group here in St. Louis. And so she's been with them since 2008. And for those of you who are familiar with that, they are a project and full-time basis placement agency, which specializes in IT, interactive, design, marketing, and public relations. So prior to her time with Robert Half and the Creative Group, she was an agency director for an entertainment agency in St. Louis. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, everybody.
And myself, my name is Pam. I've been with Spectrum for the last 2.5 years as a recruiter. And prior to Spectrum, I was with a staffing agency here in St. Louis for about 6.5 years or so. So also going through and doing some of the placements for project work as well as full-time. And am part of the marketing advisory board with UMSL as well then too. So again, we're just thrilled to be here today with you guys to share some of our knowledge that we've had with our companies as well as with some of our clients and those types of things as well then too on the switch from in-person interviewing to more of a virtual interview as the stay-at-home policies have been in place and those types of things then as well during COVID-19. So we'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions. So Elizabeth and Avery, how would you guys best recommend really going through and preparing for a virtual interview?
Avery, you want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. I think there's a few things that I always say to check first. So testing your technology, doing a trial run, making sure things are working so that you're not doing a whole lot of back and forth and can you see me, can you hear me? Do it with a friend, a family member, something to make sure everything's working right. I think secondarily, I would make sure that your environment is protected and that you're somewhere where it's quiet and you can be focused and you're not going to have any distractions. We were joking a little earlier with Pam's dog was barking. Some of the worst things that can happen is having those distractions, and they can kind of break your concentration and what you're trying to convey. So making sure that you have a really protected space away from distractions and children. And I know we've got kids and dogs and cats and everything at home, but an interview is important, so making sure that you have your space very protected, and also like that there's not a lot of clutter. Like Avery's background is perfect. She's like the only person that your thing you can see, so to make sure that you're the center of attention because it is your time. Dress like you're at an interview, making sure that you're really put together and making that great first impression. Those are a couple of the main things that I would say that you're ready and prepared for that. Avery?
Yeah, I would also say, practice describing yourself. That should be the easiest and most fluid kind of part of the interview. I think it shows when you have ease in describing yourself and how your skills might relate. So another beyond kind of the technology and kind of the prepping of the background and also just practicing with someone to see how you come across on camera. I think it kind of surprises people sometimes. Being able to see yourself actually on screen, I think feels a little different than how you might feel you're projecting yourself. So practice is good.
Well, I think that brings in another good point is the interaction and eye contact that you have, because it can be kind of weird where like I can see everybody and I can look at them, but then my camera's up above. So practice trying to be engaging that way, because I know that that can be hard. Kind of what Avery was saying, practicing with someone, like, how do I look? Do I look like I'm looking down? Do I look like I'm looking into the camera? Because those are things that are also really important to build that rapport and body language that you're showing that you're engaged.
Right, absolutely. So that also brings to a good point as well then too. So dress code, I mean, obviously we want to make sure that we're dressing for success when we're going through and interviewing. So how does dress code differ, if at all, for virtual interviewing versus the in-person interviewing?
This one makes me laugh. And the reason why is like, really you can only see from here up. So if you want to wear your pajama pants on the bottom, then hey, have at it. I know I've been wearing my slippers a lot, and that's been nice. But yeah, I think that it's a first impression, and you always want that to be your very, very best foot forward. So I would, also listen to the audience of, I guess, of who you're interviewing with. And that's, I think, goes for in-person or virtual. If the environment is not, very professional, then you don't necessarily have to be in a whole business suit and tie and all of that. But those are things that I always ask too. Don't be afraid to ask prior to the interview, like, what is the dress code for your organization, so you can match that. But it never can hurt to be overdressed. It's never going to be not in your favor. So I always say dress to impress.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I would also say that, because the video and how you project yourself on the video is kind of the only chance you get, because you don't have that physical kind of dynamic that you're going to be building on in an in-person conversation. I think that your appearance and how you project your confidence, which I think translates into how you dress, is really one of the key things that you can really showcase yourself and your confidence.
Okay, very good. So speaking of then showcasing yourself and your confidence, I mean, how do you go from, the in-person body language and those types of things for the in-person interviews and really relay that, since again, you really are kind of from just the chest up at that point. So how do you go through and make sure that you are relaying that information, that you're engaged during a virtual interview?
I think Elizabeth said this about eye contact and being really engaged and locked in. I mean, I think it's all too obvious when people are working on something else or reading from notes, and I think those things detract from you looking like you're engaged. And not to say that video, you're completely under the microscope, but a little bit. Because you're on camera. And so, I think eye contact and just not looking like a robot, like being a little fluid with, your body movements and hand gestures and things like that, I think bring the human element to the conversation.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay,
I think,
very good,
you
very
want to
good.
show
So-
your personality. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're having a little delay. But yeah, you want to show your personality, and like any conversation, you want to build that rapport. And so I think that's what's really important and I think that takes a little practice. It's weird to look into like a little camera and try to build rapport with the person, on the other side. But I think that is the key when you are having these conversations. You would want to build those types of rapport when you met anyone in person. So you want to do that same type of thing, in the virtual environment as well.
Okay, very good. So I always typically tell candidates as well, when you're going through and doing in-person interviews, plan on arriving about 15 or 20 minutes ahead of time for your scheduled interview. So what would be your guys' recommendation with regards to virtual interviews, whether it be via Zoom or, WebEx or another platform? How early should you be signing in then to be in the meeting room, if you will, for virtual interviews?
I would say be early. You don't need to be that early, like 15, 20 minutes, because you're not driving anywhere. I think that's just to make sure you can park and you find the building and all those things. But I would say be 5 minutes early. You definitely don't want to be the last one on that meeting. So it gives you some time to get settled in. Again, check your technology, make sure things are all going well, so that prompted time you're ready to go. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, that gives you a little bit of padding to iron out any kinks that might surprise you. Like when I got into this call, you guys couldn't hear me at first. So even though, we've all done this several times, sometimes, you just have a kink or two to work out. And then the other thing I would say too, and this is something that I've noticed, given I feel like the influx of people that have been on video calls and using these platforms and stuff, is that oftentimes you get a busy signal or get kicked out, or some things that I think we've found that if you dial in a few minutes early versus at the top of the hour, or when a popular kind of call-in time would be, you can make sure that you get connected and you're not late.
Well, that brings up another good point. Each platform has a little different user interface. So especially if you're not familiar, WebEx is very different than Zoom, and Teams is very different than those as well. They're all very intuitive, but if you've never used it before, it's important to kind of get on there, and to Avery's point, kind of work out the kinks, make sure you kind of know where your mute button is, that your camera's on, all of those things. So, in addition to already testing it from.
Awesome, guys. Thank you. That's great feedback. So going through and looking kind of what the best tool is to go through and use for virtual interviews. I mean, would you recommend, using your computer over your phone or over a tablet, or, what are kind of the thoughts that you guys have as it relates to, what the best medium would be for virtual interviews?
I feel like it's, whatever kind of can be at your eye level and show your best kind of, waist up kind of view. I know a lot of people talk about the view from their phone, and it's kind of projecting up at your neck, and it's kind of like a weird kind of angle. That's not to say that if the phone is the only thing you have to use, you can't prop it up on something, or get it positioned so that you're still kind of in a professional looking angle. But then, obviously be mindful of power considerations and things that would need to be plugged in if you're using a device that maybe doesn't have the battery life, because obviously a video call is gonna suck that pretty dry. So
Yeah, I would suggest, if you have a computer, that usually looks the best. But if you don't and your phone is your only thing, make sure that you do practice that and set it up where you're not holding it. I think that's very hard to like hold a phone and look in it and be engaged and be aware of talking about your experience. It's just a lot going on. So I would suggest a tablet or computer or some sort of desktop that's going to be a little bit more stable, set, where you don't have to worry about handling that, and it's just there and you can just talk and engage. I know somebody put a question on the side panel or the chat about what are the platforms that are used most often. And what I've seen, Zoom has been used quite a bit. Microsoft Teams is a huge one. I know that that's what my organization uses. And then WebEx are probably the 3 most prominent that I've seen. I don't know, Avery, what does Fleishman use?
Yeah, a combination of WebEx and Teams. And I think we've been able to kind of establish which works better for different circumstances. I think WebEx is a lot easier to share externally, at least from, some of the things that I use it for. But I think so long as you, like we've said earlier, like download whatever you need to download and kind of get yourself familiar with the platform, any of them are good. So.
Yeah, and someone also wrote in the chat, Zoom has had a lot of security issues, so I think people are moving a little away from that, especially organizations. So they usually have some sort of platform that they use internally. It sounds like, yeah, WebEx and Microsoft Teams are used very often in that space. So familiarize yourself with those if you don't have it. Sometimes you might have to download it ahead of time and make sure it's on the right browser. So that's, again, why testing it in advance is a good idea.
Yeah, I know we use WebEx and also Modern Hire for on-demand videos, as well as Modern Hire Live then for more of the virtual interviewing stage. So those are kind of the things that we primarily use within our company as well. Okay, awesome. So what are your guys' thoughts with regards to virtual backgrounds? I mean, is that something that you would encourage people to use, steer away from? What are your guys' thoughts with regards to that?
So I would say use them, but they should not be distracting. So there are some that I think are really nice. They look like a really nice office, or they look like a very clean background. You don't want Tiger King in the background or something like that. So it definitely shouldn't distract you or distract anything from you. Depending on what your background is, but you can make personalized backgrounds. And I think if you're a designer or a marketing person, if you have some sort of logo or brand for yourself, I mean, as long as it's not crazy distracting, I think that could be a cool touch. But you definitely want to make sure you're the forefront and the focus rather than ground.
Yeah, and I would say they're really good for people that don't, for whatever reason, have the ability to kind of find a clean spot in their home. I've talked to a lot of people that maybe have roommates, or they're working out of their bedroom, or a setting that maybe isn't as professional, and so maybe a circumstance like that might encourage you to opt into one, but I don't think you need to use them if you already have a space that's pretty clean.
Okay, very good, very good. So let's kind of talk about the day of the interview then. So typically, when you've got an in-person interview, you arrive and they usually come and get you from the lobby, and you kind of make that small talk as you're walking into the meeting room. So how do you go through and kind of get that connection towards the beginning of a virtual interview when everything's being just done over the computer, and instead of just going straight into the typical interview questions and those types of things? How do you kind of build that connection and that comfort level with the individual?
Go ahead, Avery.
Sorry. I would say that in a decent amount of cases, your interviewer is probably going to be prepped to initiate the conversation. they're probably doing this, on a fairly regular basis. Not that you should wait for them to, or not be prepared with something on your own, but I would think that, in a lot of circumstances, they're going to initiate the conversation. But I think kicking it off with, this is a little bit about me, and I'm really excited to talk to you to learn more about this opportunity, and just about your business and how my skills might translate. Would be kind of a good opening kind of conversation starter.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think, right now we're all facing challenges. This is new to a lot of hiring managers as well, So I think making small talk and breaking the ice of, how are you surviving in quarantine, right? How has this changed your work environment? Is a great kind of opening, warming everyone up. You also probably learn a little bit about that hiring manager, about their organization a bit, and maybe how they're doing it and reacting to it. And then you might find some key information that then you can, identify with, where you guys can make a connection, and those are things that I think, work well, and anything that's topical that you feel like is important, I mean, it can even be the weather. Like, I'm over the rain. I want warm weather. I want it to be sunny, especially for locked inside. It's messing with my mentality, anything to kind of show your personality and break the ice, to start things off, is never a bad thing.
Okay, very good. So, what are your guys' thoughts with regards to cheat sheets, if you will, kind of having that document next to you to be able to refer back to make sure that you cover off on some of your points, or the list of questions that you may want to be asking them during the interview as well, then too, when you're kind of interviewing them, if you will. What are your thoughts with regards to using cheat sheets on virtual interview, and how would you best go through and communicate when you're taking notes or different things like that, so that the interviewer doesn't think that there's issues with the software or different things like that?
I would just say, be very familiar with whatever is on your sheet. I think, like we've talked about earlier, it's really obvious to see people's eyes go elsewhere. And so that's not to say that you can't reference notes, but I think it's helpful to give your interviewer the heads up that that's what you're doing. In terms of preparing questions, if there are three things that I can say are critical in an interview, having some questions, whether they're simple or specific, is really huge. I think there are people that I feel like can have really good interviews, but if they don't have any questions, that can sometimes set things off on the wrong foot, like you're not as interested or something like that. So absolutely have questions prepared and reference them. Just, hey, let me go through my questions, and you would do that in an in-person interview too. So I don't think it's unique to this situation, but you definitely don't want to make it look like, one, you're Googling the answer, and you're taking your eyes off, the person that you're meeting with. And then two, you definitely don't want to look like you're reading from a script either. So just be practiced in your responses, and let them, kind of fluidly roll off your tongue, versus having to reference your notes all the time.
Yeah, I would agree. Not to like belabor on the issue, but you should be very comfortable with talking about yourself. You wouldn't reference really notes in an in-person, so I wouldn't suggest referencing notes in a virtual interview. I would practice those things, and if there's key points you want to make sure you get out about how you're fit for that job, then I would make sure you've got that in your elevator pitch or anything like that. And then again, to Avery's point, you would certainly have a list of of questions written down if you didn't know them off the top of your head, and pull those out in an interview. And some people even say, hey, I really want to take notes at a certain point, if you're asking more, about the environment and things, and you want to write things down, just say, hey, I've got a notepad here. I just wanted to take down notes. Is that okay? And that I have some notes here from some questions I'm going to reference, just so you're aware. I think stating the obvious is always a good thing, so they don't know what you're doing, so they know what you're doing off to the side.
Okay, very good. So what would your recommendation be? I know a lot of times when candidates are coming in for interviews, they also have documents that they're bringing with them, whether it be awards that they've received that they want to go through and share with the hiring manager, or whether it be, portfolio pieces, or those different types of things as well then too. So is it better to go through and potentially share that information with the hiring manager if you have their email ahead of time, or is it better to go through, whether it be sharing your screen to kind of walk them through that, through those pieces, or, do a follow up with sending that information? What do you guys, think is the best way to kind of go through and make sure that you're being able to best represent yourself, as well as some of the awards that you may have received to date?
I would say, I guess it depends on the role, but if it's something that you do want to share, hopefully a link to whatever it was in your resume, especially if it was a portfolio piece. But if it's not, and there's something very pertinent to the position that you wanted to share, whether it's a case study or something that you want to reference, I would just, ask, like, hey, I would love to walk through my portfolio or my case study with you to show kind of what I did here at this job. Again, I'd be very prepared for that. I would know the technology and how to share your screen, and how to walk through that. So I would role play that with someone at home, because if you're going to do something like that, it better be seamless, and you better like knock it out of the park. And it should be relevant too, right? You don't have to overcompensate because we're on a virtual interview. So if it's not really relevant to the opportunity, or it's not going to be a huge value add, then it might be something that you can just mention and not necessarily go through.
Yeah, I would say, I think showing your ability to use the technology and share your screen and showcase things live is phenomenal. I think that people have really been able to shine in those areas when they do it well. If you don't feel confident, probably don't do it that way. You could potentially send it in advance, but I think I would probably say a little bit about whatever it is you want to say or share, and then as a follow-up to the interview, then you can share it via email, or just remind them that the link is in my resume. I really enjoyed talking to you this afternoon about some of my work, and again, sharing the link here, something like that.
Great. And I think that brings up a very important point as well too, whether it be in-person interviews or virtual interviewing. The key to going through and following up after the interview, make sure that you're sending a thank you note, whether it be a thank you note via mail, whether it be an email over to them, basically going through and really pinpointing some of the things that you guys may have talked about during your interview to more so personalize it. But I think that's definitely an important part as well then too, just to make sure that you are going through and following up after your interview as well. So have you guys seen an increase in virtual interviewing, before pre-COVID-19, if you will, with some of either, Avery, with you, are you guys doing that at Fleishmanhillard, or Elizabeth, have you seen some of your guys' customers, clients going through and starting to do more so the virtual interviewing before all of this?
So Robert Half and Creative Group, when we would interview folks, everything would be done virtually for the first round, just because it's a time saver and you don't have to like get in your car and come here and for us to get to know you. But yes, a lot of our clients did, mostly on the tech side. IT is very savvy in that, and I think they did a lot of those. I had seen it too, if hiring managers don't sit local, but the job is local, influencers and decision makers did use it. I think it will be more prominent now than it was before. And honestly, I don't know if in-persons will happen until like maybe the final round. I think everybody sees it as a time saver, and you can get a lot more done in a short amount of time. I think also virtual interviews are a little bit more succinct and less drawn out than in person. And so people can manage their time well that way. So I think a little combination of both.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we started to see video interviews a bit more related to time savings, and it was more for positions that had kind of a tech savvy kind of focus to them, or for us, it was going to be for, a technology client where that's their culture. But obviously, since the lockdown and work from home mandates, it's out of necessity, and I think we've seen success from it too. I think we've learned a lot about capabilities maybe that we didn't know we had, and making decisions based on video interviews was kind of new to us pre this scenario, but again, out of necessity, it's just kind of what we're doing now. So.
Yeah, and one other comment, I know Pam, you mentioned following up. Most people aren't in the office, so I wouldn't send anything in the mail because who knows when we're going back and if we go back, if we'll ever get it that way. So I would make sure you follow up via email so that they get it in a timely fashion. Just something to note. Logistically, normally I would say send both, but right now, who knows if you're going to the office to get the mail, there's probably like one person in your office that's doing that. And then there was also a comment on the side here about, having a Google Doc side by side if you had it like up close by the camera. I'm supportive of that if they have no idea that you're using it. So I would make sure, again, you're practicing and role playing that and able to stay engaged with the person you're talking to. But if you have that quick guide, that it doesn't look like you're reading to the side, because even if it's side by side, if I'm looking here, you could see I'm looking rather than looking at the camera. So again, I would just practice and make sure you're prepared so that you see what that person is seeing.
Okay, very good. So I guess, any other tips or tricks that you guys would like to share that we haven't really covered off on today with regards to virtual interviewing and kind of being able to set these folks up for success?
The one thing that I haven't called out specifically is just, I think, expressing enthusiasm. And I don't want to say over enthusiasm or over emphasizing. I think it's just that if you do role play, I think you would find that you don't totally come across on camera like you might feel like you're doing. And so I think, your intonation and, your gestures and just all these other kind of body language and kind of vocal elements about being on video, can help really express enthusiasm. And I think that is what can set candidates apart and get the hiring manager really enthusiastic about potentially hiring you. So that's my one. And then the second is, just the follow-up piece and following up shortly after with a thank you note, I think goes a long way.
Yeah, I agree. I think, showcasing your personality is important in any interview, and building that rapport. And so making sure that you feel confident in doing that and how that is projected on the other side. A lot of these you can record, so maybe record yourself and do it and then watch it back and see, or do it with a family member or something like that. I think like with any interview, and this is just be prepared, do your research, know about the job, know about the company, know about the person. If you have all that information at your ready, and you're someone that can, have a good conversation with people, you're gonna do well. And then the other thing is that you can speak about what you've done. So standard normal interview prep is probably the most paramount part. The technology part is the second layer that we just throw in there. So everything that you would do in a normal interview, you should be prepared and ready for. And then just make sure that you're really prepared from a technology perspective, and that again, your family or friends or dogs are, not distracting you during that time frame, and that you have that really protected time where you're not nervous that somebody's listening to you in the house, or that you're scared that your dog or cat's going to come in or something. Give yourself that time and separate and do the very best that you can, so that you've got that protected time.
All right, very good. So let me go through and share my screen with you guys. Maybe. Can you guys see my screen?
No, Pam, not yet.
Okay. So this goes back to Elizabeth's point earlier about making sure that if you're going to share your screen, make sure that it is seamless as possible. But just kind of wanted to go through and obviously, lessons learned here today. I think that we see that the in-person is not all that different from the virtual interview. So obviously going through and making sure that you are finding that connection, being yourself, basically personal branding yourself, if you will, and making sure that that's really coming through within your interview, whether it be on, virtually or whether it be in person. And so same rules I think apply as well then too, just for the prep of an interview, for things to make sure that you're covering off on during an interview, and then obviously as both Elizabeth and Avery pointed out, making sure that you're doing that follow up to thank them for their time during the interview as well then too. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Caitlin. I think that we've covered off on most of the questions that popped up in the chat box, but we'll go through and make sure that we've covered off on all of that information. And then obviously, Caitlin, if you would like to share with folks how to go through and get a copy of the presentation today, if they'd like to go back and refer back to it at any point in the future.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Costner. I'm a graduate and teaching assistant at the University of Missouri St. Louis. I do actually have a couple questions that weren't in the chat to everyone. So do all the tools offer those virtual backgrounds that Zoom offers? And would I need to create one for each or just one? And is it easy to upload to all different platforms, not just Zoom?
That's a great question. They all have different options, and they're kind of placed in different areas. So I would, again, familiar yourself with the technology if you're choosing to use a background, that you know how to find it and where and test it and make sure it looks good. Because some of those backgrounds, if you are someone that talks with your hands a lot, I'm one of those, it like messes up and it gets very distracting in the background because it kind of cuts out your head. I also have long hair and it looks really bizarre and weird. So if I know I'm going to talk quite a bit, it doesn't work really great for me. I think it's more of a distraction than it's a help. Again, that's how how I perceive it. I don't know if you can you can use the same one, but I don't think you can upload it and it like automatically is there. To my knowledge, you've got to like go in each platform and upload if you have something in particular from a background that you want to share. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, I would agree with Elizabeth. I mean, like we said earlier, I think if you can find a kind of clean background somewhere in your house, that's probably preferred. But if you really want to include something, I think you can. And I do think that, like Elizabeth said, you've got to do it, manually for each one. But I think a lot of times you can just use a JPEG or something like that.
Sorry.
Caitlin, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So can you each kind of give us an example of a bad Zoom interview that you've had in the past and what went wrong and how it could be fixed?
Oh, wow. Okay, yes, I've had several. I think the worst ones that like come to mind is what we were just talking about, is that the environment behind them is a mess. Their house is messy, they're in a bedroom, there's dirty clothes on everywhere, like it kind of just, it's a peek into your life. Like, you don't want somebody looking in your closet, right? So you want to make sure that, again, your environment is not putting you in a negative light off the get-go. So that's one. And then this didn't happen to me, but it happened to a colleague of mine. Their child was at home, which I have a 3-year-old, so I totally understand that. And there's been sometimes he's come into calls unexpectedly. But if I know I'm on an interview or if I'm giving a presentation, he is definitely somewhere that's not going to mess up with what I'm doing. But this person in particular, their child came in the room, and then they like kind of reprimanded their child in front of the interviewer. And that wasn't the best situation, so you got to roll with the punches. We're all in this boat together, right? None of us are going to have a perfect scenario, but how you handle it and that perception then to the other person is going to give them quite an insight to your maybe personality and how you react under pressure. So you want to make sure you handle it with grace and in the right way, but try to eliminate any of those things as possible. Those are the big things I've seen.
I would say, I'd agree with the background thing for sure. I think I did have a situation in a bedroom and a mess behind them. And, it's just, there are better ways to put your best face forward, I think. But I think that kind of on the flip side of the question, seeing somebody that's ready to go and everything works before words are even exchanged, I think really sets it off on the right foot. So I think if, the first 5 or 10 minutes are you trying to figure things out because you haven't done a lot of the prep and testing work beforehand, is probably a good way for it to go sour. And then I think almost just some of the general prep work you would do for interviewing, like know the job, know how your skills translate. That's a really good way for things to kind of go south as well.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think one of the key takeaways is whether or not you're doing a virtual interview or whether you're doing an in-person interview, you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. And so you want to keep the professional, keep that aspect of it even during a virtual interview. So just because you're doing an interview at home doesn't mean that you should act like you are at home. And I've seen dirty dishes piled up in the sink. I've seen, t-shirts. Don't come to an interview with a t-shirt. Obviously maybe the dress code might just be like a collared shirt or different things like that, but at least still have that level of professionalism as well. And I think as long as you're putting your best foot forward overall as you're going through and presenting yourself, then that's kind of the same whether it be virtually or in person.
Perfect. Thank you. So I have one more question. So do you all see Zoom being used by companies for interviewing after the virus is all kind of calmed down and almost over?
Yeah, I think we touched on that a little bit. I think it is going to be something that people are going to use moving forward more often, because I think they're now familiar with it. They know that they can get the same type of in-person vibe by the virtual interview, so that they can expedite timing. Because I think that's what's really important, is when you have a role to fill, you need to be really conscious of your time and the person's time, and you can probably interview more people in the time frame you would interview like one person in person. So I think I project, and I've seen my hiring managers do this already, is that the final interview might not even be till the in-person. Honestly, I've had people hire during COVID never meet someone in person. So I can see that happening. I've had people start their job not even meeting anyone in person, and now they're sitting at home doing their job, and then they'll meet them, I don't know, in July or August sometime. So I think those things will definitely be this is going to be the new norm.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think we've all seen a lot of efficiency come out of, the process aspects of interviewing. And I think a lot of organizations have really risen to the challenge. And so I think, implementing some of these things kind of as standard, I think is probably, kind of the reality of things. So.
I know there was a chat question. Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say with that, I was going to say, I know with Spectrum, I mean, for the team that I specifically recruit for there, we've actually been using on-demand video interviews as part of the interview process for probably about a year and a half or so. So, after they talk with the recruiter, then there's, the questions that they need to go through and basically do video selfies of themselves answering these questions. And then that's the part of the package when we send them over to the manager for review is the video interview, in addition to, their resume, and then notes from their conversation with the recruiter and those types of things. So I know other companies have kind of started to go through and do that as well then too within the last couple of years. So I think that this just adds on, the next layer, if you will, for now kind of going through and doing more of the virtual interviewing as the next stage.
Thank you. So I saw in the chat, Rebecca Pender has a question. Do you recommend using a headset or your device microphone for the best voice quality?
Well, as you see, like all three of us have something different. For me, I have the best quality, I feel like, on my headset, but I have a pretty high-tech headset that my office uses. It noise cancels anything behind me. So I prefer using that. Personally, I don't think it really matters. I think what's going to help make sure that you're dialed in, that then there's no distractions for you. I've had people that have had headset earbuds like Pam, and then people that have just used their normal. I think if you've got a quiet room and no one's going to come in, then there's no problem with putting and using your regular device. So, I mean, again, just be comfortable with the technology and make sure it's just not a distraction and that it works.
And Christian, it looks like you made a good point. I saw that you had responded saying that you use your Apple AirPods, and obviously ask for feedback on your audio when you're kind of going through and starting that. So I think that that's good advice for everybody to kind of keep in mind as well then too.
Yeah, I would say, I think headsets are probably the best, but I don't think if you don't have them that you're at a disadvantage in any way.
Perfect. Thank you. So I don't see any other questions. If you guys have any, I will be posting this recording on all of our social media for the UMSL College of Business. And we also have a calendar. This is in the UMSL calendar, so I can post that link there and you can refer back to it. But it is always good. Make sure you like, follow, and share us on UMSL College of Business social media. We always appreciate that. And thank you to all of the panelists. We really appreciate you coming out and giving us all the Zoom interview advice that you gave today.
Thanks for
having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, have a good day. Good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.